analyst, and you're watching Eagle News International. Good evening, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and good evening to everyone joining the broadcast tonight. Here are the headlines.
North Korea has successfully tested a new hypersonic gliding missile in what would be the nuclear-armed nation's latest advance in weapons technology.
I will never forget.
Philippine boxing legend and 2022 presidential hopeful Manny Pacquiao said that he is hanging up his gloves after a glittering decades-long career in the ring.
And lava from an erupting volcano in the Canary Islands has reached the ocean, according to volcanologists, raising fears of toxic gases being released as the magma hits the seawater.
And David Aguilar, an Andorran 22-year-old bioengineering student, has earned the nickname Hand Solo for the prosthetics he creates from Lego pieces for himself and others. One of his latest creations is a prosthetic arm specially adapted for an 8-year-old with disabilities living in Strasbourg.
First, North Korea has successfully tested a new hypersonic gliding missile, according to state media today, in what would be the nuclear-armed nation's latest advance in weapons technology. Now, hypersonic missiles move faster and are more agile than standard ones, making them much harder for missile defense systems on which the U.S. is spending billions to intercept. On Wednesday, Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the South Korean and U.S. militaries were capable of detecting and intercepting it. Both Koreas are now building up their weapons capabilities in what could become an arms race on the divided peninsula, with ramifications for neighboring Japan, China, and the wider region. Seoul is also spending billions on military development, and this month successfully test-fired a submarine-launched ballistic missile for the first time, making it one of a handful of nations with the advanced technology. On Tuesday, it held a ceremony to launch its third submarine capable of carrying SLBMs. The nuclear-armed North, which invaded the South in the 1950s, is under multiple sets of international sanctions over its banned nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs, and earlier this month said it had tested a long-range cruise missile.
Lava from an erupting volcano in the Canary Islands has reached the ocean. Volcanologists said that raising fears of toxic gases being released as the magma hits the seawater. Now, dramatic television images showed a stream of glowing lava cascading off a cliff into the water, creating a large cloud of smoke. The lava flow had already generated an impressive deposit, more than 50 meters or 164 feet high, according to researchers from the Spanish Institute of Oceanology tweeted, posting pictures from the research vessel Ramon Margalef. Residents were warned to stay home due to the possibility that there will be a small shock when the magma enters the seawater, and that this small shock causes vapors which can be toxic, stressed Miguel Angel Marquende, technical director of the Canary Islands Volcanic Emergency Plan, or PIVOLCA. Experts say the entry of lava into the seawater could cause explosions sounding like gunshots and a fragmentation of the molten rock. The Cumbre Vieja volcano, which straddles a southern ridge in La Palma, an island with 85,000 inhabitants, erupted on September 19, spewing out rivers of lava and that have slowly crept towards the sea.
Meanwhile, aftershocks rattled Greece's largest island, Crete, on Tuesday, a day after a strong earthquake that killed one person, damaged hundreds of buildings, and left many people homeless. Take a look. The strongest tremor was measured at 5.3 magnitude at 7:48 a.m. local time, according to the Athens Observatory, as Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis prepared to visit the area. Crete is Mitsotaki's home island. A preliminary inspection has shown around 1,000 buildings were damaged in Monday's quake, which struck at a depth of just 10 kilometers or 6.2 miles. The epicenter was near the agricultural town of Arca Lochori, where a man was killed inside a church that collapsed and nearly a dozen other people were injured. It was a very difficult night. We had many aftershocks. We were awake all night, according to Arca Lochori community head, Crisula Kegeroglu, and telling this to ERT State Radio. Authorities have put up tents to host hundreds of people whose homes are deemed unsafe to return to at present, and have also made dozens of hotel rooms available. Kegereglu said around 1,000 people spent the night in tents in the outlying area.
Meanwhile, a 6.1 magnitude earthquake struck off Japan's northwestern coast on Wednesday, but no tsunami warning was issued, that according to Japanese and U.S. authorities. The quake produced shaking across a large swath of the northeastern coast and was also felt in Tokyo, but there were no immediate reports of damage. The United States Geological Survey said the quake hit at a depth of 368 kilometers in the Sea of Japan, known as the East Sea in Korea. Japan's meteorological agency said there was no tsunami risk following the jolt. Japan sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc of intense seismic activity that stretches through Southeast Asia and across the Pacific Basin.
Meanwhile, Japan's ruling party elected former Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida its new leader on Wednesday, setting him on course to become the next prime minister of the world's third largest economy. Take a look.
今や我が国の民主主義の危機にある、こうした強い危機感を感じ、我が身を顧みず、誰よりも早くこの総裁選挙に立候補を表明させていただきました。
The soft-spoken centrist defeated popular vaccine chief Taro Kono in an unusually close race to succeed Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide, who is stepping down after just a year in office. Kishida, meanwhile, 64, will be confirmed as the new premier in a vote in Parliament on October 4 and will then lead the Liberal Democratic Party into general elections that must happen by November. Speaking after his win, he called on members to show the public that the LDP has been reborn and appealed for their support. The scion of a political family from Hiroshima, Kishida has long targeted the prime minister's office and ran unsuccessfully for party leader last year, losing out to Suga. He became the first candidate to step into the race this time around and ran on a platform of pandemic stimulus, touting himself as a listener who carried a suggestion box to events to receive proposals from citizens.
Philippine boxing legend and 2022 presidential hopeful Manny Pacquiao said he is hanging up his gloves after a glittering decades-long career in the ring. The 8-division world champion and senator here in the Philippines, who has his sights set on a high-stakes rumble to replace President Rodrigo Duterte, said quitting the sport that had lifted him out of poverty was the hardest decision of his life. Take a look.
I will never forget what I have done and accomplished in my life that I can't imagine. I just heard the final bell. Tapos na ang boxing. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. It is difficult for me to accept that my time as a boxer is over. Today, I am announcing my retirement. I never thought that this day would come. As I hang up my boxing gloves, I would like to thank the whole world, especially the Filipino people, for supporting Manny Pacquiao. Goodbye, boxing. Who would have thought that Manny Pacquiao will end up with 12 major world titles in 8 different weight divisions? Even me, I am amazed of what I have done.
The 8th division world champion and national hero made the announcement weeks after losing his last professional fight against Cuban Yordenis Ugas in Las Vegas. Pacquiao, who entered politics in 2010 as a congressman before being elected to the Senate, said last week he will make a tilt for the country's highest office. Pacquiao, a married father of 5, thanked his millions of fans around the world and paid special tribute to his longtime trainer, Freddie Roach, who he described as his family, brother, and a friend.
In other news, World Health Organization Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus apologized on Tuesday in what they called a dark day for the agency after a damning report on allegations of rape and sexual abuse by workers sent to fight the Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The report found clear structural failures and individual negligence among the UN agency staff after dozens of women told investigators they were offered work in exchange for sex or were victims of rape. Take a listen.
I'm sorry for what was done to you by people who were employed by WHO to serve and protect you. I'm sorry for the ongoing suffering that these events must cause. I'm sorry that you have had to relieve them in talking to the Commission about your experiences. It's my top priority to ensure that the perpetrators are not excused, but are held to account.
We in WHO are indeed humbled, horrified, and heartbroken by the findings of this inquiry. I'd like also to thank all the women and girls who have come forward and given evidence to the investigation and thus have given us the basis on which to take action in WHO, which has been necessary. I'd like to indicate that as WHO leadership, we apologize to these people, to the women and the girls, for the suffering that they have had because of the actions of our staff members and people that we have sent into their communities to help in a very difficult situation of an epidemic.
The 35-page report paints a grim picture, noting the scale of incidents of sexual exploitation and abuse in the response to the 10th Ebola outbreak, all of which contributed to the increased vulnerability of alleged victims who were not provided with the necessary support and assistance required for such degrading experiences. The Special Commission identified 83 suspects, including 21 employed by the World Health Organization.
In other news, top U.S. generals said Tuesday that they advised President Joe Biden to keep American troops in Afghanistan and expressed concern that the Taliban has not severed ties with al-Qaeda. General Mark Melly, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and General Kenneth McKenzie, commander of U.S. Central Command, said they had personally recommended that some 2,500 troops remain on the ground in Afghanistan. Take a look.
Yes, my assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution. I think that our credibility with allies and partners around the world and with adversaries is being intensely reviewed by them to see which way this is going to go. And I think that damage is one word that could be used, yes.
Retaining Bagram would have required putting as many as 5,000 U.S. troops in harm's way just to operate and defend it. And it would have contributed little to the mission that we've been assigned, and that was to protect and defend the embassy, which was some 30 miles away.
A reconstituted al-Qaeda or ISIS with aspirations to attack the United States is a very real possibility. And those conditions, to include activity in ungoverned spaces, could present themselves in the next 12 to 36 months. That mission will be much harder now, but not impossible.
The remarkable testimony pits top military brass against the commander-in-chief as the Biden administration continues to face tough questions about what critics are calling a botched withdrawal that directly led to the deaths of 13 American service members, scenes of chaos at the Kabul airport, and the abandonment of American citizens and at-risk Afghans in the war-torn country.
Meanwhile, top U.S. General Mark Melly testified that calls he made to his Chinese counterparts in the turbulent waning months of Donald Trump's administration were intended to de-escalate tensions, and the former president had no intention of attacking China. Take a look.
I am certain that President Trump did not intend to attack the Chinese. And it is my directed responsibility, and it was my directed responsibility by the Secretary, to convey that intent to the Chinese. My task at that time was to de-escalate. My message again was consistent. Stay calm, steady, and de-escalate. We are not going to attack you. I am specifically directed to communicate with the Chinese by Department of Defense guidance, the policy dialogue system. These military-to-military communications at the highest level are critical to the security of the United States in order to deconflict military actions, manage crisis, and prevent war between great powers that are armed with the world's most deadliest weapons. The specific purpose of the October and January calls were generated by concerning intelligence, which caused us to believe the Chinese were worried about an attack on them by the United States.
Now, the calls between Melly and his Chinese counterpart, General Li Zucheng, were first revealed in the book Peril by Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Robert Costa. The first call was on October 30, 4 days before the U.S. presidential election, and the second was on January 8, 2 days after supporters of Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol in an effort to prevent certification of Democrat Joe Biden's election victory. Some Republican lawmakers have accused Melly of overstepping his authority and called for him to resign.
U.S. State Department says an American brother and sister barred from exiting China since 2018 in an apparent bid to pressure their father to return and face criminal allegations have finally left the country. Neither side gave a reason for the sudden lifting of a Chinese exit ban on Victor and Cynthia Liu, but the development could add to accusations in the United States that President Joe Biden's government was engaging in hostage diplomacy with China. Beijing said in 2018 that the siblings, along with their mother, Sandra Han, were barred from leaving due to suspected economic crimes. The siblings' release came shortly after the U.S. Justice Department last Friday announced a deal to defer prosecution of felony fraud charges against Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. Beijing denies any link between the Lius and Canada's release of Huawei's executive Meng Wanzhou, who had been held on U.S. fraud charges.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong's government has applied to dissolve the parent company of a now shuttered pro-democracy newspaper. According to officials today, the same day strict new guidelines were unveiled for the city's public broadcaster. Take a look. Now, earlier this year, Apple Daily, the city's most popular pro-democracy newspaper, closed down after its assets were frozen using a national security law that China imposed on Hong Kong to root out dissent. On Wednesday, Financial Secretary Paul Chan said The government had filed a court petition to wind up Apple Daily's parent company, Next Digital Limited, or NDL. The announcement also came the same day staff at the city's only public broadcaster, the RTHK, were issued more than 100 pages of new rules covering their reporting. The new rules require RTHK to, quote, safeguard national security in all its reporting. Programs produced or broadcast by RTHK must not contain contents which provoke or deepen hatred, discrimination, or hostility towards the Central People's Government, arouse others' antipathy, or cause offense, read the document which was obtained by AFP. The new rules also warn staff away from contact with foreign governments and organizations. It also bans describing Taiwan, which China claims as a sovereign nation with its own diplomatic relations.
Was arrested by
David Aguilar, an Andorran 22-year-old bioengineering student, has earned the nickname Hand Solo for the prosthetics he creates from Lego pieces for himself and others. One of his latest creations is a prosthetic arm, especially adapted for Bec Noor, an 8-year-old with disabilities living in Strasbourg. Take a look.
Bioingeniería. Voy a agarrar la botella.
The prosthetics are mostly standard. They are big and heavy. So for his spine, it was not a good idea. And then we started thinking what else we can do. So we started just Google, and YouTube showed us Lego prosthetic. And that's how we found the Hand Solo, David Aguilar. And we decided to write him on his email. And he answered.
Zaure me pasó las medidas del brazo de Bec Noor y decidí pues darle una oportunidad a ver con los Legos, porque ya tenía yo un poco de experiencia gracias a mis prótesis y a lo que estudié en la universidad, pues pude adaptarle lo que es unas poquillas piezas de Lego a su brazo. Se pegó 1300 kilómetros para venir a probar la prótesis y creo que la sonrisa que se llevó cuando le empezó a funcionar y que la podía usar con total normalidad es el mejor regalo que he tenido nunca.
Well, now I can grab things with my hand. Before I couldn't. And I can pick up stuff from like a higher distance, like, for example, this notebook.
¿Qué pasa en Polonia?
Amazing. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by North Luzon Express Terminal.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Iba't ibang sakuna at kalamidad ang nararanasan ng bansa. Kapag may banta ng panganib, kailangang maging alerto at kung kailangang lumikas ay magtungo sa ligtas na lugar. Bilang paghahanda sa mga ganitong pagkakataon, mahalaga na may gobag na dadalhin ang pamilya. Narito ang dapat na nilalaman ng gobag ng isang pamilyang handa. Mahalagang dokumento sa selyadong lalagyan, flashlight, kandila, posporo at silbato. Radyo na may bago at ekstrang baterya. First aid kit kasama ang panlunas sa lagnat, LBM, sugat at iba pa. Ang mga gamot na regular na iniinom ng pamilya. Magagamit para sa mga sanggol, bata, matatanda at may kapansanan. Pera at mga barya. Pagkain na madaling ihanda, di na kailangang lutuin at sapat para sa 3 araw. Inuming tubig sa saradong lalagyan at sapat para sa 3 araw. Telepono, power bank at charger. Lubid, lumang dyaryo, matitibay na lalagyan, damit, kapote, bota at mga sanitary supplies, sleeping bag o banig at mga kumot. Suriin ang mga laman ng gobag kada 3 buwan at palitan ang mga laman nito na malapit nang masira. Ilagay ang gobag sa lugar na madali itong makita at makuha sa oras ng sakuna.
Welcome back. Malacanang is encouraging parents to enlist their children aged 12 to 17 years old for COVID-19 vaccines after President Duterte approved the administration of vaccines for children and for the general population by October. In a press briefing, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque announced the president's approval of vaccination for children and for the rest of the population by the previous classification of A1 to A5 groups. Take a look.
Ang good news po, inaprubahan na po ni Presidente ang pagbabakuna sa general population simula po ng buwan ng Oktubre. Kaugnay pa rin ang bakuna, nagbigay ng opinyon ng Presidente na sa ilalim ng police power ng Estado po pwedeng makumpelang lahat na mabakunahan. Dagdag pa ng Pangulo, ang mga government personnel na ayaw magpabakuna ay maaaring umalis sa pamahalaan.
Earlier, President Duterte, in his talk to the people on September 27, said that children and the general population would be vaccinated hopefully by October. So far, the vaccines, which already have an emergency use authority for children aged 12 to 17, are Pfizer and Moderna. The Philippine Food and Drug Administration had revised the EUA for Pfizer and Moderna to include those in this age group. Vaccine czar Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. had earlier recommended the vaccination of children by mid-October, citing the increasing vaccine supplies being delivered to the country. He said around 100 million vaccine doses are expected by October.
Staying here in the country, the national government will exercise all legal remedies against Melly Pharmaceutical Corporation if proven that there was tampering with the labels of medical-grade face shields to make it appear they were manufactured recently, that according to Malacanang yesterday. Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said the palace is currently waiting for results of the inspection being conducted by the Department of Health on the alleged tampering with the production date of medical-grade face shields. Take a look.
Well, antayin muna po natin ang resulta ng investigasyon. Pero offhand, iniisip ko po kung meron silang pinirmahan na public document on the date of manufacture, pwede pong falsification yan, pwede rin maging estafa, no? Pero it is only as to the face shield as one of the 9 pieces na dineliver constituting 1 PPE set. Hindi pa napapatunayan yung tampering. Kinakailangan muna masubstantiate yung allegation, no? So wag muna tayo mag-conclude na karoon ng tampering. Pero ang importante, yung issue na nadanyos ba ang gobyerno? Kasi ang sabi ng Presidente, hindi gaya ng gamot, ang mga plastic face shield naman ay hindi na-expire. So yun po yung konteksto ng sinabi ni Presidente. Hindi pa po mabigat yan kasi hindi naman po siya talaga yung nag-tamper. No? Kumbaga wala siyang personal knowledge. No? So kinakailangan i-substantiate po yan.
In a Senate Blue Ribbon Committee hearing on Friday, Pharmacy's main point person, Crizel Grace Mago, admitted that she was instructed to tell warehouse staff to change expiry dates on medical-grade face shields. Health Secretary Francisco Duque III earlier said that his department will demand restitution from Pharmacy if it is proven to have tampered with the production date of its face shields. He said medical-grade face shields are supposed to last for 3 years before the foam and garter it contains deteriorates. With a tampered manufacturing date, it could only last 2 years before its quality degrades.
In other pandemic news, Russia on Wednesday recorded its highest coronavirus death toll for a second day running as infections are on the rise, driven by the Delta variant and slow vaccination rates. A government tally reported 857 fatalities over the past 24 hours and 22,430 new cases. The new figures brings the country's total deaths from COVID-19 to 206,388, the highest in Europe. Authorities have been accused of downplaying the severity of the outbreak under a broader definition for deaths linked to the coronavirus. Statistics agency Rosstat reported in late August that Russia had seen more than 350,000 fatalities. The world's fifth worst hit country with more than 7 million infections, Russia has seen cases climb since last month as vaccinations stall. Moscow, the epicenter of the outbreak, has experienced a spike over the past week, with authorities warning of rising hospital admissions.
The British government said on Monday it had warned dozens of domestic private medical testing companies over misleading prices for coronavirus travel tests following a review of costs and standards. Kathleen Eusebio of our EBC UK Bureau has that story. Watch this.
Here is an update in the United Kingdom. Desperate British motorists were on Tuesday warned not to fill up plastic water bottles with fuel as the government faced pressure to give key workers priority at the pumps after panic buying left forecourt stocks empty across the country. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said drivers seen using old bottles with petrol was dangerous and extremely unhelpful after 5 days of long queues at filling stations, causing traffic gridlock and freight tempers. Let's listen in.
If I can't find fuel today, I'm going to have to find an hour out of my working day to charge the battery. So I won't break down, but it still means that I won't be able to work the full shift that I want to. So it's obviously to do with pandemic as well, but Brexit has 100% had a big impact. I mean, you can't just remove freedom of movement of workers, make people feel unwelcome so that then they leave and then just expect it not to have an impact.
The crisis threatening public confidence in Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government stems from concerns that the lack of tanker drivers could affect supplies at the pump. Johnson on Monday night put the army on standby to drive tankers from refineries, although Shapps said there were tentative signs of stabilization. He blamed the public for panic buying and the pandemic for the original driver shortage, which prevented 30,000 heavy goods vehicle operators being tested. The chairman of the Petrol Retailers Association, Brian Madison, said demand was well above the norm, but members were seeing the first signs of improvement. Nevertheless, healthcare bodies, including the British Medical Association and the Royal College of Nursing, said urgent action was still required as healthcare staff were increasingly unable to travel. Johnson's announcement to ready troops to intervene came after a day of repeated denials they had been put on alert, angering even normally supportive sections of the media. Fuel shortages are now having a knock-on effect across several sectors. Some schools said online lessons could return as many teachers were unable to reach their classrooms by public transport. David Brown, chair of the National Courier and Dispatch Association, told AFP his drivers were unable to commit to some longer journeys as they were struggling to find fuel. A shortage of truckers even before the fuel supply crisis has led to empty supermarket shelves and delivery delays, as well as stoking fears of a lack of food. The British Meat Processors Association has raised fears that panic buying of fuel could make supermarkets' existing supply chain problems worse. The government insists Europe is facing the same problem and has eased its post-Brexit immigration rules for 3 months in the hope of enticing foreign truckers back. But critics say they are unlikely to take up the offer in sufficient numbers and blame the government for failing to replace the thousands of overseas drivers who left during the pandemic and when Brexit took full effect in January. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Kathleen Eusebio. We live in interesting times.
Making COP26 a success will certainly not be easy. That, according to Patricia Espinosa, the UN climate chief, but it is an absolute necessity to be able to emerge from this summit with a message of hope. Let's listen in.
It's certainly not going to be easy. It's never easy, by the way, in the COP processes. But I think that at this moment in time, it is really an absolute necessity that we can come out of the conference and present to the world a message of hope, a message of clarity on where we are going and how we are going to move going forward. The point is decisions need to be taken now. That's why Glasgow is so important. And we have only, I would say, this decade is the decisive decade.
As the world faces stronger and more frequent droughts, wildfires, flooding, and storm surges made worse as the planet warms, the COP26 summit in Glasgow is being billed by organizers as a key milestone for keeping the Paris goals within reach. Struck to international fanfare in 2015, the accord commits nations to limit global temperature rises to well below 2 degrees Celsius above those before the onset of the Industrial Revolution. It also saw countries promise to stick to a safer warming cap of 1.5 degrees Celsius through sweeping emissions cuts. Yet, 6 years on, atmospheric levels of planet warming CO2 have risen steadily and are now at their highest concentrations in roughly 3 million years, according to scientists. The latest round of country-by-country emission-cutting pledges baked into the Paris deal's ratchet mechanism of ever-increasing ambition put Earth on course to warm a catastrophic 2.7 degrees this century. And COP26, delayed a year due to the pandemic, will provide another chance for states to agree to key outstanding elements of the Paris rulebook, or how the aspirational goals outlined in the deal function in practice.
Climate activist Greta Thunberg calls out decades of empty words and promises from world leaders as young people demand action and money to tackle global warming ahead of a pivotal UN climate summit. With just weeks to go before the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, seen as crucial to the viability of the Paris Climate Agreement, campaigners used the opening of a 3-day event in Milan to lambast government's failure to address the crisis. Watch this.
This is not about some expensive, politically correct green act of bunny hugging or blah, blah, blah. Build back better, blah, blah, blah. Green economy, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero, blah, blah, blah. Climate neutral, blah, blah, blah. This is all we hear from our so-called leaders. Words that sound great, but so far has led to no action. Our hopes and dreams drown in their empty words and promises. There is no planet B. There is no planet blah, 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 blah.
In other climate news, in Thailand, authorities are rushing to protect parts of Bangkok from floodwaters that have already inundated 70,000 homes and killed 6 people in the country's northern and central provinces. Take a look.
น้ำเพิ่งจะท่วมมาใหม่ๆเขาก็ยังไม่ช่วยอะไรเดี๋ยวถ้าพักเขามาช่วยอ่ะคณะยังไม่แห้งนะครึ่งเดือนอะไรประมาณผลไม้นี่แหละพวกกล้วยพวกอะไรจะเสียหายนะ
Tropical storm Dianmu has caused flooding in 30 provinces, with the kingdom's central region the worst hit. The Thai Disaster Prevention and Mitigation Department said the level of the Chao Phraya River, which snakes through Bangkok after winding almost 400 kilometers from the north, is steadily rising as authorities release water from dams further upstream. Once dubbed the Venice of the East, the capital is built on former marshland and rests about 1.5 meters or 5 feet above sea level. In the past, farmland and rice paddies in low-lying areas absorbed flood water. But the city's expansion has seen much converted into real estate. And the city's flood prevention master plan, involving underground reservoirs and tunnels, has not been fully built because of problems acquiring land. Over the weekend, emergency teams staged dramatic rescues, evacuating villagers from rooftops in parts of Chayapum province and about 4 hours northeast of the capital.
United Airlines will dismiss nearly 600 employees who refuse to comply with a requirement to be vaccinated for COVID-19, according to company officials. Besides the 593 workers who refused to get vaccinated, another 2,000 employees have also requested a medical or religious exemption to the vaccine requirement. Company officials said that, and that is about 3% of United's 67,000-person workforce. The big U.S. carrier said it was pleased with the overall impact of the policy. In early August, United announced that all U.S. employees would be required to receive the vaccine and upload their vaccine card into the company's system. More than 99% of the remaining U.S. staff complied with the requirement, according to a memo to employees from United Chief Executive Scott Kirby and President Brett Hart. The airline is working on its policies for employees who have requested exemptions, citing a pending court case on the matter. Now, United said it would follow the requirements of agreements with unions as far as employees' dismissals for people who refused vaccines.
In other business news, Vietnam's economy suffered its heaviest contraction on record in the third quarter, according to officials today, after a devastating wave of COVID-19 forced the widespread suspension of manufacturing in the export-reliant country. Gross domestic product, or GDP, shrunk 6.7% on year in the July to September period, with the General Statistics Office saying it was the sharpest since the Southeast Asian nation began recording quarterly figures reportedly in 1986. Vietnam was last year among the best performing economies in Asia and one of the few in the world to expand after it kept virus numbers low and businesses largely open. But the latest coronavirus wave, which began in April in its northern industrial parks and rapidly spread south to business hub Ho Chi Minh City, caused serious impact to the economy, according to the GSO. State-run news outlet VN Express said it was the first time Vietnam had recorded negative quarterly growth since 2000. A third of the country's 100 million population faced stay-at-home order for months this summer, with factories closed and supply chains seriously disrupted. And there have been more than 770,000 infections and nearly 19,000 deaths.
In other business news, British troops are expected to be deployed within days to help ease a fuel supply crisis. The government said that on Wednesday as the retail and hospitality sectors called for foreign workers to be allowed to fill post-Brexit vacancies. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told Sky News soldiers could be delivering fuel supplies to forecourts in the next couple of days to cut long queues that have built up outside filling stations for nearly a week. A total of 150 military drivers have been put in a state of readiness, with 150 more as backup to deploy in the coming days, a source told Britain's Domestic Press Association news agency. Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Tuesday sought to reassure the public there was enough fuel in stock and the situation was returning to normal. A shortage of tanker drivers sparked fears of pumps running dry, triggering panic buying and some desperate motorists filling plastic bottles with fuel. Critics have blamed the crisis on Britain's final departure from the European Union in January and the coronavirus pandemic, plus a lack of planning to replace thousands of foreign drivers leaving the country.
Back to tech news. Facebook announced it was pausing development of the children's version of its Instagram photo sharing app after widespread criticism and building worries the platform could damage young people's mental health. The decision to hold the iteration for children under 13 comes as Facebook grapples with fallout from a withering Wall Street Journal series revealing the social media giant's own research showed it knew of the harm Instagram can do to teenage girls' well-being. Facebook has hit back at the Wall Street Journal's characterization of the internal research, stressing that the studies detailed both positive and negative experiences of social media by young people. However, Alex Stamos, a former chief security officer for the social media giant, argued that the problems online go beyond software and apps. Following the journal revelations regarding potential harms linked to Facebook platforms, Senators Marsha Blackburn and Richard Blumenthal announced a hearing Thursday focused on the question of protecting children on social media.
Finally, in our news, a small company in the Brittany town of St. Malo claims to be the first factory in France to knit jumpers in 3D without seams or waste. Watch this.
Voilà, on vient de vivre la naissance d'un pull en direct. Voilà. Effectivement, on estime que dans l'industrie textile, les pertes varient entre 10 à 30% en moyenne. Grâce à cette technologie, on a des pertes qui sont inférieures à 2%, mais dans le cas présent, à 0,5%. Et c'est vraiment un gain que tout le monde réalise d'un point de vue économique, mais aussi d'un point de vue environnemental. J'ai récupéré les mesures de notre mannequin physique, et donc c'est pour la marque Fago. Nos modèles de calcul montrent qu'à horizon 3-4 ans, on sera capable de concurrencer le Maroc et la Turquie d'un point de vue tarifaire avec une fabrication française, zéro déchet et des délais courts.
I loved watching that. I know. I hope they're not easy to, run. Oh, well, let's see.
You live it, right on through time, yeah.
Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. The news continues tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. We'll see you back tomorrow. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live in interesting times.